New Jersey in July. Fantastic. That captive nut sheared off where the bumper bracket attaches. We're going to have to remove this piece here and weld in a new captive nut. After removing the front section of the outer frame rail, I realized there was quite a bit more damage than I had originally thought. I went and removed another section of the outer frame rail so that I could extract the bumper support bracket behind it. In order to recreate this bracket, I started by making a paper template. This is the same template I used for the driver's side repair I did in a previous video. I transferred the dimensions to this sheet of 11 gauge sheet metal before cutting it out. This sheet metal was a little thicker than what the original bracket was made out of, but was the closest they had at the supply house. I don't have a sheet metal brake, so I thought I could crease the metal by using this mason brick chisel. The first bend I had to do in the bench vise. Here it is compared to the original bracket. The second bend was a little more tricky. I decided to take two pieces of angle iron and clamp it together. I set that up in the vise so that I could bend it over. I found that this 11 gauge sheet metal was too heavy to try and bend and get to the right dimensions. So I split it, and what I'll do is I'll bend it, and then I'll measure the width and weld it back together at the correct width. I repaired a rusted out section of the frame rail by welding in a patch panel. It was pretty straightforward, so I spared you the details. So here I'm just cleaning up the welds so that the bracket will sit flush. Here's the inside of the frame rail after we ground down all the welds. Now we're fitting the bracket for the bumper mount. Here's the bracket welded up next to the original. This dimension is pretty good. I'm just going to clean up those welds, and then we'll get to making some of these details, the shapes. Here's the frame rail bumper bracket after I've ground down all the welds on the inside and the underside. I've also cut out this detail. This detail is actually on the outside, like this. And it's so that you can get, if you see there's spot welds there. So in order to get the spot weld there and there, this detail is created. So a little more progress on the bracket. I welded a captive nut to the inside of the back bracket. This is what it looked like before. This is what we fabricated. You can see they are dimensionally the same. Just a few more holes that I need to drill for spot welds. Put some zero rust inside the frame rail and paint this up with some zero rust, and then weld it in place. That's how the bracket's going to fit inside the frame rail. I applied a coat of Zero Rust to the inside of the frame rail as well as the bracket. I masked off any areas where we would be welding. Those areas will receive a coat of weld-through primer. Here's the passenger side frame rail. After we've put some weld-through primer, the bracket will go in like this. As long as we have this open, I'm going to, as an extra ounce of prevention, just shoot some undercoating down into the frame rail. The bracket's clamped in place, and so now I'm going to tack it in. I have the plate for the outer frame rail clamped in place. Just a little bit more adjustment and we'll weld this in place. Here it is all welded in. The weld's ground flush. I have just this piece that goes up here, and in order to weld that in, we need to fix this area. I'm going to start by grinding around this hole and making a patch that'll go inside to which the captive nut can be welded. I cleaned up the front frame rail piece and created a patch. It's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to tack this up and we'll see how it looks. Here's the frame rail piece that we repaired. The repair is all welded in. Now I need to weld this nut to the back. Run that through. And weld that in place. Here's the captive nut all cleaned up. The weld's all ground down. And this piece I'm going to clamp in place here. After fitting the repaired piece in place, it was welded in and the welds were ground down before a final coat of Zero Rust. Here is the finished product of the passenger side front frame rail repair.